So our next guest is Scott from InchDairnie. Congratulations on your new appointment, Scott.
Thank you very much appreciated.
And it's great to have you here to speak about
this project.
It's
great to be here with you two gentlemen as well. I feel privileged to be on this seat today.
You did all the hard work.
It was a team effort. We're fortunate we've got a good team at InchDairnie who, from the very beginning, we've been quite open to a bit of experimentation. So when I go to the team and say I want to try this or I want to try that, they don't roll their eyes anymore. They just say, okay, what do we need to do? So when we got the book, the difficulty I had is not doing the experimentation. It's actually deciding what to do. As a chemical engineer, I wish the book had been available 30 years ago. When I joined the distillery, when we were building it, we were always had a vision to be pushing the boundaries and understanding what we do. But I thought I knew quite a lot. But one of the things I've learned is that when you start to look at the book and realise I didn't know as much as I thought I did. But for me, that just gives me an opportunity to look at it in a completely different way and look at, what else can we be doing on the distillery.
What were the big surprises for you then? Or were you thinking, looking back in the 1920s, they were kind of fumbling about in those days, and we now know how to distill.
When I first read the book, the one that got me, there was two areas. So there is a style of still called the champenoise still, and what they call them the barber caps, and they look very much like the Lomond still that we have on site with the bubble caps within it. So here we are. The Lomond still is very much based from the 1950s, and here we are reading about it in the 1920s, which is the precursor to that. And it's, for me, is that part before the 1950s has almost been lost. And so I think it's important that we look backwards to be able to look forwards, because there was reasons where things might have been stopped or not progressed because either technology wasn't available or time. Because a lot of, we've got to remember in this book, these distilleries were commercial operations. They were doing what they were doing to survive. It's not about, we're getting a great opportunity here to do something different, and that's a luxury that they didn't perhaps get to do. So they were doing it to survive and having to adapt. So that was the first thing that I thought, is that we've got quite a modern style design of still, and here we are looking at the precursors from the 1920s. So that got me. One of the other things that really got me reading the book, and other people have been talking a lot about it, is the regionality of the whisky industry. The lowlands, the highlands. Having worked in the industry long enough, I know that defining it as a style of spirit can be a bit confusing to the consumer, having known that there are certain distilleries that are in the Highlands, Speyside and the Lowlands all produce a similar style of spirit. But here we had the reason why at that time there was those differences, because of transportation, things that we take for granted, getting your yeast. We are fortunate at the distillery, we use dry yeast, which has I can hold it for years. Whereas these guys, going to Islay for 2 weeks, getting on the boat to get your yeast. I mean, the smell, how it would smell, I've got no idea, I really don't. But that's all you have to use. So I definitely, others have said, we're fortunate in the technology that we're trying to strive and move forward. But the people who were doing it at the time, the way that they do it and the variation that they must have had to overcome, they really knew their craft, which is understanding why people spent years moving their way through the different facets of the role, because having that experience. And it's one of the things that Al and I have had long conversations about, is I think all those wonderful stories that come through have been lost, because within those stories there's a nugget of experience and a nugget of an understanding that might has been lost over time for us. So getting the opportunity to read the book was fantastic for me, but getting the opportunity to do something within the confines of the book was something I couldn't say no to. As I said, innovation is something that is really part of InchDairnie. So being able to give them the chance to do something within the confines of this book was, they didn't need to ask me twice, put it that way.
So tell us, what did you do, Scott? What do you do at InchDairnie?
So InchDairnie, we had a plan, and like every good plan, didn't materialise. So the original plan is we were going to produce the spirit during winter time. So we, as a distillery, we use spring and winter barley as part of our normal processing, and we also use different varieties, strains of yeast. So for this project, we thought we'll use a winter barley because it's winter time, and we were going to use an ale yeast as the others had been using, and it was a dried ale yeast that we've been looking at. I'd been trying to get inquiries previously from local breweries to see if I could get some of their yeast, but again, as others have found, it's very, very difficult. So I went back to the dried yeast because I know how to use it and what it was. So the original plan was to do a standard mash, but use the loam still in place of the spirit still. That was the plan. However, what happened is we're in the process of doubling the capacity of the distillery, and at the time when we were going to be using the loam still, it was in bits. It wasn't even the position it was going to be, which was very frustrating because we really wanted to test it. But then it got us thinking. The whole point of us trying to use the loam still was that interaction with the original design years past. But the fundamental part of the loam still is it gives you a lot more reflux. So we couldn't do it with the actual loam still, but we have on our spirit still a reflux pump, and it's been installed for over 8 years, and it's never been used because I've never had the chance to do it. I think one of the other people spoke about is about getting the time. You have a lot of thinking time, but no actual physical time to do it. So we had used the winter barley and the variety of yeast before, so I knew the style of spirit that I could get. Mm-hmm. So I had an opportunity to do it through my own spirit still and put reflux on it. And the transition was the original spirit would be quite heavy, quite malty as well. But as soon as we put it through the spirit still and we got the reflux, the fruity notes that came through, it was lighter, fruitier, but there was still an element of that maltiness, so you knew exactly where it was coming from. We got it out. One of the things we didn't do as well, normally we pitch our dried yeast with some other yeast just to give us that dual yeast. But for this one, we only used the ale yeast. Our yields were rubbish. So from a commercial point of view, we couldn't replicate it going forward. But the flavours that we got from that wash was different to what we normally get, and added to the distillation being different. We got a lovely, completely different character of spirit that we haven't produced before. I mean, we are fortunate in the distillery that I get to tinker every year, but we also, in a standard year, I'll produce 9 different styles of spirit, depending on what the requirements are. And this is my 10th one. This gave me a style that is similar to some of them, but different enough to be in its own right. So for me, it was, we got something different, and we know that the difference is purely down to the still. And I think that's one of the things looking at the book. There's so many different potential variations you could do within it, and it's we're very much interested in, by doing X we get Y. So for us, we had an opportunity to have 2 parameters that we had controlled in before, but the difference being is purely using the spirit still in that way. Now, I'm an engineer, so I'm not going to stop there. The reflux pump is either on or off, so we're dictated by the bore of the pipe. So I'd love to do a bigger bore pipe or a smaller bore pipe using the same pump to see what impact that would have on the reflux of it. But that's just who I am. I never stop thinking. I've constantly trying to think of what else we could be doing.
And I think just kind of picking up on that, that's something that came out when I was reading the book, that these distillers are continuing to experiment and to look at new ideas and to move things forward, because you see all the variations, you see all the opportunities that exist in there. So it wasn't a fixed system at all.
They were far more reactive and entrepreneurial, but I think they had to do that to survive.
It was a tough time.
No, it's a very, very tough time. As we spoke previously on, you can understand why the industry has changed the way it did regarding going to the single source of yeast and maltsters becoming about, because there's so much variation coming around about them that as a distiller, it's difficult enough just doing that part of the process, but if you've got all this variation upstream as well, and trying to juggle all of that to make sure that the liquid you produce is going to be approved by the blender, if you can take some of that variation out, then that means you've got a viable business. So I think I've learnt a lot from it. I really did. I honestly believe that that's only from one timeline. I'd be fascinated, and I'm looking at Leon's in there. I would be fascinated about before then, but also after. As I said, we should be looking back to understand why we do things now, and somewhere along the lines that has been lost in the books of history. It really has. And I would say I'm a young distiller, but I'm not as young as I used to be. I've been in the industry nearly 20 years. But it's having someone to say, have you seen this before? And and unfortunately that's not the case in the industry at the moment, with the exception being Alan. But I think it'd be wonderful to have that collection to say, this is what we did within this time scale. But what did we do in the 40s? When we were at that period of time, was that anything different? No. How has it moved from the 20s to the 30s to the 40s? But also, can we go back a little bit as well, even to the 1900s and move it that way? I'd be fascinated to do that, to really understand. As I said, has there been some possible learnings that's been taken from the 1900s?
Yeah, where's that come from?
Where did that come from? Or when you get to the 20s, this is what we're doing. But what fed into that? It's going back far enough to the starting point, I suppose. I'd be real interested in looking at that, because I think there's so many. For making a spirit that's only got 3 variables for inputs, there's so much variation within the process that, as a distiller, I think is an opportunity to really truly understand your own equipment and truly understand the constraints that you have within your own distilling.
Yeah, it certainly challenged my view of traditional.
Yes.
When you read it, you said, there's something I noticed there was Warner sour mash, and that we all thought it came from the Americans in the 60s. So it challenged this view of traditionalism. But I thought what I liked what you guys did was, you've got quite a flexible plant. So you speak about how you can recycle and that, your mashing system as well. But you looked at that to deliver what was maybe the style in the 1920s. I was fascinated by that. We can't use a Loman still. Oh well, we thought that was the thing. But you controlled the reflux.
Yeah, and we focus on that one element. And as I said, the other elements is, let's go back to the principles. The grain. We used a currant variety of winter barley. By going to winter barley, we are stepping out the normal, but it's a currant variety. I'd love to go back to try some other varieties of barley to see the impact that has. We used the ale yeast, the dried ale yeast, but that's only one style of ale yeast. I'd love to deviate to see, is there other ale yeast that I can use in a dry format because it's easy to use? But is there something more flavoursome by going to a brewery now and getting their active yeast? I'd love to try that. So again, having fixed parameters, but having some variability at one point and looking at what impact those flavours are, because it's these different interactions, and we've all spoke about it. You learn a lot about yourself and your own equipment by doing these. I'm fortunate that we've been, every year since the distillery was built, we do some experimentation. So we have done the sour mash, we have done the different grains. But like I said, the more I learn, the more I realise I didn't really know to start with. So it's very much
opened up a whole world.
Open up a completely different world. And I always thought I knew the understanding of the regionalities, and the book just went, nope, you thought you knew it, and you don't. And that's what I loved about the book. And that's just one element. As I said, the design that I thought of the Loam still was very modern, and as I said, I thought it went back to the 50s. And here you are in the 1920s of people that have got elements that were, there might be, the 50s one was taking those elements and making it his own, but I could see the elements that fed into that, which for me was, as an engineer and a bit of a whiskey geek, that is fascinating that someone's looked around them and thought, I like that idea. I wonder if we put it togetherness is what we get. So for me, there's so much opportunity, I think, from even just looking at that small defined period of time, and a lot of learnings that can be taken on and move forward.
I mean, the stills are fascinating for me as well, because, again, the history, which has kind of been whittled down, there was steam, there was coffee, and then boom, that was it. But if you actually then go back and you look at, what the rum distillers were doing with retorts, and what the Irish were doing with all the different stills, and if you delve into it, it's incredibly rich.
I think there's as I said at the time, I think there's certain components of that they stopped where they were because they were constrained by the
economics,
time, the time. Right. And we focused on certain parts of it, but I think I don't think redesigning the whole concept of distillation is a bit much. That's one variable. Maybe it's good to keep that same fundamentals. But there is people out there looking at vacuum distillation. I'm a chemical engineer, so that is a natural movement of this is how you currently do it, but that was right for the time. Can we do it slightly different to it? But what other thing for me is that I've got a real mutual respect that I know the technology that we use to control our equipment. And then you look at these guys that were doing this 100 years ago, and you think, no, we think we know what we're doing. These guys they must have been on the ball. Although they might not understand specific details that we do, they had I feel they had a far more understanding of their craft, as a way. But then, as I said, the industry in those times, people went in it with their life. Yeah. So they'd garnered that and gained that experience from the people that had been there for 40 years. So they were learning as they went along as well. And as I said, the industry at the moment, there's a growing number of us who are asking the questions, but it's making sure that we can have access to the information and understanding from previous ones that has been lost through time.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. That do you think the industry, to some extent, closed down in terms of those questions, or maybe that the questions were being asked were about efficiencies?
I think what happened,
rather than actually here's some opportunity for flavour creation.
I think the industry changed, and that as the demand became significantly greater, that this style of spirit consumers like, so let's just keep doing that way. And then other distilleries saying, oh, they're doing that now. Oh, maybe we should copy. So there was an element of that, but also people went to the same yeast source because you're wanting, as we spoke about, you don't want to be phoned up to say, we can't get your yeast next week. I've got plans for that. No. So if you've got a dedicated supplier, it takes one variable out of the equation. But then that yeast is produced the same way, almost aseptically. But it gives you that consistency, but it's going to create the same. You've lost that variability that maybe give you these wonderful flavour profiles that you were getting, because it could be the way that brewery used that yeast, because a lot of the yeast were specific to those locations. So I think that element got lost, but as the businesses got bigger, as I said, to be the commercial, and they were commercial, they had to do that. So then things became a lot more prescriptive, because you want consistency. As the blender wants to know that the spirit that you're producing today is the same as last week, as last year, and we're forward. So that has to be an element of consistency approach. So you look at, as a distiller, you look at those components, how I can be consistent. But if you produce a spirit that's light, you don't change. We're quite different in that with the equipment we have, we can produce different styles of spirit. They're not, some of them are quite different, other ones are subtly different, because they're more like brothers and sisters rather than mother and father, if that makes sense. But that's how we are. But when you come here and speak to Callum and all the wonders that he's been doing, I followed what Francis was doing. I'm sorry to name you Francis. Francis was doing, and I went to see Francis, and do you know what? I thought it was fantastic though. He saw it in the book and he goes, I've got a trailer, I'll try it in the trailer. Right. How can I get Pete into this? I'll use this. And that's what it's all about. It's about seeing something and saying, how can I do that in the site? And with us all doing it in a different way. We're a slightly bigger setup, so I couldn't get liquid yeast volume. I just couldn't do it. So that's why I had to go to the dried yeast. So I know that that's focusing me in. So it's taking a bit of variation within it. But that's something, as I said, that I'd like to look at a later stage. Keep the other parameters constant, but get different yeast from different breweries.
You spoke, Scott, about the commercial. It wasn't a commercial success, which is interesting because that's been one of our questions. Would you do it again?
In a heartbeat. So for me, when I mean it wasn't a commercial success, what I mean by that is the yield that we got out of the washback was not as high as we normally get. But when we do the experimentation that we do, I go after flavour, and we know it goes at the expense of yield, because I want to be doing something different, and you can't do both. But I would definitely do it again, but I would like to do it with the Lomond still. I'd like to go back to do what we originally,
what you wanted to do.
What we originally, the concept was about, and just to see exactly what the style of spirit that we get from that, how it compares to what we produce. But now I've opened the worm with my reflux. I want to be doing, what more can I do with this? So as I said, it's, for me, the difficulty is getting the time to do it all. I had a big long list of all the things I wanted to do. I read this book, and then I got another 2 lists that I want to do. Having done the work myself on the distillery, I've got another list purely on what I learned and observed from this trial. And that's the thing, is I'll never have the time to do everything I want. So the hardest part is not coming up with the ideas. It's which one do we actually do. And I think that's the wonders of doing it with a similar-minded group of distillers, because they're taking different parts of the book and putting their own slant into it, and getting to see how what they got and what they had to overcome.
It's a new collective.
Without doubt, it's like I've been in the industry for 20 years, and it's very much, this is how you make spirit. But I have to say, in the last 10 years, people are starting to open up a little bit more about, well, what happens if I do this? I mean, Francis being on the farm, what he did was used what he could. Holyrood is taking parts of what they did, but did it in a slightly different way. And that's only 2 people we're talking about, and there's 6 of us. And for me, it's a starting point, because I want to do this again, and I'm sure others would do it similar. But is there an opportunity that we did the 6 in isolation? Is there an opportunity to be a bit more collaborative, or even shared learnings? No. I noticed that Holyrood used Edinburgh for their yeast. Can I have the contacts, and I'll go and speak to see if I can get these. It's about that.
Exactly.
It's about that. Understanding and networking is an opportunity, and the fact, you just need to look at the people you've spoken to. You get the feeling that everybody's energized, enthusiastic about it, and that's what you want. That's the wonders of the world.
I think that's fascinating from us.
Exactly.
The passion,
it just comes across. Everybody.
There's passionate distillers, and six of these innovative distillers decided to try this.
Yes, and that's the 6 that tried to try it. I'm sure as people read about the book and see this, there'll be more people.
Why didn't you ask me?
Yes, because I know that there's other people out there who are like that. There's other ones, and just purely from the design and nature of the business, they just don't have that opportunity. But there's a lot of others out there that are thinking, maybe I should.
So, in other words, Leon's now got to go and dig out records pre-1900, 1940, 1950s, and contact more distillers to.
Yes, he's got quite.
Easy.
He's got quite an easy job ahead of him. But yes, I also think, and I've spoken a lot to Alan about it. How can we capture the conversations and the history, the wee nuggets, as I said before,
Aye.
No, it's relying on the people that have been in the industry a long time, that have experienced. I was fortunate when I joined the industry, I had some good teachers, but they'd only been in the industry for 20 years before. So I didn't have the opportunity to spend time with someone that'd been in it for 40 years or 50 years, and what they'd learned from the people that had trained them. So somewhere along the mist of time, I'm sure that there's wonderful nuggets of information or ways of doing it that's kind of been lost, or even just the stories you hear.
Aye.
I mean, it's the wonders of the industry when you speak to like-minded people and you tell your own stories. I mean, that's what brings the industry
Aye,
alive.
exactly.
It's why people join the industry and never want to leave, because we're all passionate and proud in what we do, and everybody loves a good story over a dram. Let's be honest. But we all support each other. And it's about, and that's I think unique to the industry that we working in, and it's, for me, this is an opportunity for the industry to encourage the next generations coming in to say that how that we do it now doesn't need to be the way we do it going forward. It's not fixed. Let's go and try something new, and be prepared to do it. I mean, we all learnt something along the way. There was things that we didn't work, but there was things that did work. And I think that one little nugget of something works.
I think that's your next book, Dave.
That's my next book. Oh, great, thanks. We'll get something out of it. Scott, thank you so much.
No, thank you very much. Thank you.
Great stuff, Scott.
Thank you.
Thank you.